And it's live. Yep, so it's just you and I today, and this is not the after show. So what we're going to be doing today is continuing with the witch's traffic cone or broomstick. And apparently the word cone is against Twitch's terms of service, which is a little weird because a traffic cone is a thing. But anyway, so what did we do last time? Animation. So we added an animation to this. So just basically very simple, bobbing up and down. And we did that by, let me open the so the original item is just a furniture item. So it's static, does not do anything. And this follows the same standard furniture setup or item setup that you would use for just a standard default furniture item. So the mesh has a vertex group called root, and the mesh is then parented to the root node. So this cube is the root node, and that's what IMVU uses as the locator for the item. So these are the nodes, or these are the points that latch onto furniture nodes in rooms. So we had that set up. Load the number 5. So what we did in order to animate this, or to animate furniture generally, you don't animate the root node. Leave that untouched. What you have to do is add an additional node that will be the animation or the control node for the animation, and it's that which is animated. And of course, to get the mesh to move with it, we have to edit the mesh so that, excuse me, we have to edit the mesh so that the vertex group that's associated with the mesh reflects the control node that's going to animate. And in this instance, we just simply called that control. So we called this node control, so that then means modifying the vertex group. So where's my annotation tools? Make this easier to see. So object data, and then vertex group section. And all you need to do is just rename, this would have been root, but you just rename it. So double click this and then type a new name that reflects the name that's given to this node that's now controlling the animation. And once you've done that, assign that to everything. Make sure that this group is assigned to the mesh in object mode. Let's clear all of that. And get rid of the annotations in object mode. So you need to make sure that everything is selected. You might have to do that twice. So for example, if you'd been previously editing and you had a number of faces selected, select all clears that active selection, and then you can use it again to reselect everything. So once you've got that, click the assign button, and that will assign that to everything. So where's my annotations again? Could do with the shortcut key for that. So click this button, assign, and that will assign everything to the mesh, this vertex group to the mesh. So once you, Right, you can change the mouse. So once you've got your vertex group assigned, all you then need to do is animate the node. And that's it. You don't need to animate anything else, just the specific node that actually controls the mesh. And for that, dope sheet, the timeline will be shown by default. It won't look quite like this, but the timeline is shown by default. Change that to dope sheet, and then within dope sheet, select the context and action editor. So there are a number of ways of doing animations in Blender, or controlling animation. No matter what you use, you will need, for IMVU in particular, you will need an action to be present. Otherwise the result won't work in IMVU. But once you've got your action set up, so this is the actual, whoops, this is the actual sequence, that's the name. So this is control action. So Blender has appended the word action automatically onto the control node. So it does that automatically when you create a new sequence. And that's what will be exported, and it'll carry through with it these nodes. But we'll get to that later. So, your animation. So quickly going over that. So this is a cycling animation. So this repeats. The way to think about these is that depending on the complexity of the sequence, you basically want the first pose and the last pose to be exactly the same. So those two are duplicates. And the action is in the middle. So what that does is that it allows the sequence what's that doing? Oh. It allows the sequence to blend through the action so that it does a sort of, if I draw this, if it were a line, you've got your straight line, which is no change. So that frame and that frame would be exactly the same. But with this change in the center here, so let's just mark a high point. We've got this. Whoops, drawing with a mouse. But because those two frames are the same, it repeats these points. So that's that frame and that frame. And this frame in the middle is this peak. So what it's doing is this. It's just repeating this over and over again. But because those two frames, front and back, are the same, it cycles, or it loops, and that's how you get your looping or cycling animation to repeat. So in this instance, all we've done for the middle pose, or the middle, well, yes, it is a pose for nodes, is just dragged the blue handle of the widget upwards so that we're a short distance from the ground. So the other two, exactly the same, they are on the ground. And that is a simple looping animation. Obviously for poses, it's slightly more complicated in terms of if you want a walk cycle for the avatar to perform. But the basic principle is the same. You have the front and back, or first and last frames, as duplicates, which allows the sequence to repeat itself without tripping up. Or you'll often see, if you think about dance poses, and things like that people have grabbed from, what did they call them? Motion capture files. They're just a sequence, but there's no looping in them. So what you'll find is the avatar it jumps back to a start position, which may be somewhere else. And that jump is because they haven't set the front and back or the first and last poses correctly and adjusted the sequence to fit. But, so, we've got a basic animation, but now what we're going to do with this is we're going to add seating or a pose that we already have. Let me open another instance of Blender. So in a previous episode we created the pose, very basic pose. So we imported the mesh and the root node, which has disappeared. Where's the root node gone? There should be a root node in there somewhere. So what you do is you use the mesh and the root node, which is not there at the moment, as your proxies so that you can create your pose. And you open those or append them into your pose file and then pose the character based on the physical structure of the mesh. But what we're going to now do is we have to export the pose as a separate file, and then once we've set up the traffic cone, we have to export that as a separate file, and then we put the whole lot together in IMVU. But first we have to add the pose or the seating nodes that accommodate the pose. So to do that, let me just reopen this file just to get a... Right, so that's the pose. So to do that, we use the avatar dummies. That's these things. But what we want are the nodes. We use the dummy as a positional device that helps us position the avatar relative to the item that we're working with. So what we want are these. And we're going to do something quite, hang on. We're going to do something to these nodes that you want to think about when you're actually creating your poses for animated objects, because we want these, which are the capture and picture nodes, we want these to be grounded, but we need the seat, the handle and seat to follow the item, because those are the things that are actually used to position the avatar. So what we're going to do, let me just remove the so I have to move that to another layer. Right, so to do that, by the way, that is, so we've got our layer buttons. That's these things. Each one of these that has a little dot in it has something in each of the layers. And what you can do is use your layers to show, hide, and to organize your scene. But we had the cone in this layer with the standing avatar. So what you can do there is select the object, press the M key, M for Marty. That'll open the layers pop-up. Then you just click any one of these layer buttons and it'll move the selected item into that layer. So that's all we did. We just moved it from one layer to another. Maurice. Oh, we've got some people in the chat now. Way. So, what we're going to do is split these nodes into two, because we want these two nodes to be associated with the control node, and then we can link the catcher and pitcher to the root node. So first, let's just position the lot. So right click the big node of the seating and just move it using the widget handles, and just position it so that it's more or less in the center of the scene. Doesn't have to be exact, but so that's your numpad keys. So if you're using a full-size keyboard, numpad 1 is front, numpad 3 is right, and numpad 7 is top, and then numpad 5 toggles out of, into and out of perspective. Right, so roughly position the avatar, that's where we need it. We don't have to worry about the position of the dummy itself, we're just using that as a proxy, a rough guide, because it's the position of the handle and the seat node that we're after. So, this could be tricky, because let's see if, which node is that? That's a root node. That's seat node. Okay, so just to make this easier, you can either right click, well, there are two nodes in the same place, which makes them slightly tricky to select. So what you can do is just right click any one of them and just, not that one. Not that one either, because it resizes the node. Resizing the node resizes the object because they're parented together. So we'll have to do this the hard way. So what we want to do is parent catcher and pitcher to the root node first. So we might have to do this one at a time. So right click, shift right click, and that'll get us two nodes, and then parent those together. So object, parent, object, keep transform, and do the same with the pitcher. Shortcut key for that is P. Or is it Control P? Yeah, it's Control P. So Control P, and then keep object, or object, parent, object, and then keep transform. So those two are now parented to root specifically, but we want seat to be parented to control. Let me just double check that. So in object properties, you can check which one you've got selected by noting what the name, what name's shown in the input box there. So we've got the right one. Shift right click, parent, and then same again for the handle. Right click, shift right click. So Whoops, hid that. Don't want to hide it. I want to select it. So select the root, press the G key, and we've got everything moving as a unit. So save the file. And then the final step, where's the seat node? So we have to select the seat node and we have to give this a unique name. Let's call this which is cone. Which is, yeah, that's right, which is cone. So this is important for custom poses. Ceto1, which is cone. Yeah, that's right. It's case sensitive. So the word or the label after the period, full stop, needs to be capitalized. And that should be all that's needed. So we've got handle, that's parented to the control node. We've got the seat, which is parented to the control node. Catcher and pitcher, which are parented to root. So what this means is when the animation runs, the avatar will bob up and down, but the catcher and pitcher won't. They'll remain grounded. In fact, what we can actually do as well is switch to global, is shift these to the side, and we can rotate them. We're rotating them on the horizontal plane because you want to always make sure that these two nodes are facing each other. They're always facing each other. No matter where you position them as a pair, they face one another because these are the two nodes that the avatar stands at. So if you get the distances incorrect or the rotation, so let's say that's rotated slightly askew, it basically means that in IMVU, when the two avatars interact with one another, they won't be properly facing each other. They won't be aligned. So make sure that if you do move these, you move them as a pair. And that will go for 3D Studio Max and Maya and whatever else you're using. But this means now, obviously, that because we've got those two nodes rooted to the root, they won't animate or they won't move when the object animates. So let's save that. And we can actually export this right now. So press the A key to deselect, and then the A key to reselect everything. And then we want to deselect the avatar, so hold the shift key down and then click the avatar mesh and that'll deselect it. Where's that come from? Oh, that's right. Optical illusion. Always make sure that at least some object, one object, is highlighted. The exported plays up if they're not, so, and we can export that. So export to FBX, selected objects, deselect. This is optional, apply modifiers. armatures, make sure that this is deselected always. Add leaf bones. And then animations, we want to deselect NLA strips and force start and end keying. And this forces IMVU. This forces FBX to export any animation sequences as individual animation sequence strips. Not strips. Segments of the FBX. Otherwise, it saves all the sequences as a single strip, which IMVU can't work with. So export. So that's the object, and we can test this, or we should test it just to make sure that it works. Loady, loady, loady. Being ever so slow. So create. Derive new product. Well, the back of the t-shirt, Roy, says, yes, I was looking at you. Furniture. And then we import the file that we just created. So FBX import, load FBX, and that will is it a furniture item? Was it a furniture item? Has it saved it? Yeah, furniture. What the heck did we call it? Witch's cone. Witch's cone 7. So load that. Open. So it's a two-step process essentially. So all you're doing when you are using the FBX importer, first it has to load the FBX into the importer, which is essentially the screen that we're looking at now. So for Blender users, using default settings, set the scale to 0.01. Disable rename room nodes. Discovered that this is causing issues for Blender users, so you might have to keep that disabled. Turn that off, deselect. Oh, we didn't adjust the material. Let me do that whilst we've got this open so that I remember. So, although IMVU is quite tolerant because it auto assigns a number to each of the materials that you assign to your object. So in Blender we can double click the entry in the aperture, the preview aperture, or in the material ID, just type 0 with square brackets either side, because it causes issues if you have more than one material assigned to the same mesh and they don't have IDs. Particularly if you use the same material or you use the same material name, but it's assigned to several different textures, which you can do. So make sure you do that. So save that. So let's do that again then. See if we picked up. So deselect the avatar, export FBX, which is cone, blah de blah. So that's set. Leaf bounds deselected, geometries, that's deselected, selected objects, export. So we have to close this window just to make sure. Nope, we don't want to save. Derive new object, furniture. And import again. So FBX import, load FBX. Number 7. Yeah, so it's now brought in the material properly. So 0 for the mesh ID, and go and scale 0.01, and disable rename room nodes. So we've got our animation sequence there. That's good. So import changes, apply changes, and there's our rocket cone, and it does have a pose on it, so we can test this. Actions, we need to create an action, so add. We want this to stand.idle. Auto start, want it to loop infinitely, so 0 for all ensembles, and room for the type. After playing, we want it to play the same one, so pick same ensemble. And then down in the ensembles, which is where we fiddle around with the animation itself, the imported animation should be now available. Select. Want it to replace. Playback speed, that's fine. Loops, let's put that at 0 as well. And that should, yeah, there we go. Is that doing anything? Oh, that was weird. Oh yes, it is working. But of course, because we're following the avatar, it doesn't look as if it's actually doing anything, but which is kind of funny. That's funny, actually. It looks like, because the camera always follows the avatar, when you actually sit on this, because we're in a white room, it doesn't look as if anything's happening. So you'll have to move the mouse over one of the room's default standing pose to actually see those appearing to animate. But it's not, it's the avatar that's actually animating. That's quite funny. So that works. So that's good. So let's save that. Save as. Version 2. Now for the pose. We have to do something special, essentially, for Blender if we're using FBX. Because if we export the pose as it currently is, with just a single keyframe marked, that won't work. Because the FBX, I'm not sure if it's the FBX exporter or IMVU's conversion process, it doesn't recognize that there's something going on with the pose. So what we have to do is essentially duplicate the pose and then reset it. So to do that, just deselect and then reselect everything. Move the frame marker to another frame, frame 10, 5 would do. Press the Insert key, I key, or Pose, Animation, Insert Keyframe. Now, depending on what file you've used, if you've used the default, Pose starter file, which is, hang on. Oh, someone, Sunny. Sunny's asking, do we always write stance idle? No. If you want whatever it is that you are animating, if you want it to automatically play when the item is loaded into the room, then yes, stance idle. But if you want to trigger it, so someone types a word, or it's triggered by a word that someone types just in normal chat, then you use a word or phrase label, and that will trigger the pose or the animation. So you can do it automatically using stance idle, or manually by actually providing a word like LOL, lol. So let me just drop so what am I looking for? Right, okay, so copy that, copy. So pose starter file. So if you use the pose starter file, we can open a third instance of Blender, which you can't do with any other application, which is super cool. Avatar. So if you have the, where is that? Pose. Pose. There we go, pose. So if you use this as your starting point for your poses, it's set up so that, annotation time. So this section at the bottom here is set to automatically insert a keyframe. So if you move any one of the bones, it will automatically insert the pose or the position the bone is set to. But you can't access these settings, and it's inserting lock rot, that's location and rotation. So if you start with the starter pose file, it's set up to do all of the pose animation, not pose animation, insert the pose position automatically for you, but you can't get to these settings from where you actually do that, which is the action editor. See, there's nothing there, which is never quite sure why that isn't the case. But so if you start with the pose file or the starter pose file, it does it all automatically for you. So let me clear that, and we can close that. Quit. So what we need to do for this to work, for our poses to work in IMVU, is we need to duplicate the pose doesn't have to be across 10 frames, but it's just for the sake of ease of use. And then select another frame, and we need to reset. And for that, pose, now is it clear transform? I think it's clear transform all. So if you watch what the pose or the avatar does, it resets everything and inserts a keyframe. And this is important when you're using FBX for poses, because the FBX import, the export-import process, or the conversion process, doesn't recognize that there's something going on with the file unless there's a change. So this bit forces, I guess it's IMVU, it must be IMVU. It forces IMVU to recognize that there's some pose data there, so it'll look at the pose file properly. So once you've created your initial pose, you need to set your action up so that you duplicate it across a number of frames, and then you reset it. And the irony is that this is actually similar to how you would actually create an animated pose. But that is for another day. So let's save this. Whoops, save as pose 4. So if you just drop the another link in chat. That's a link to previous episodes where we've gone over the where we've made the pose, or you can watch a collection on Twitch. All these links, paste. But essentially, you start with the starter file, which is the one that we opened. That should still be available in the Open Recent, and it's not. So just quickly go over that. So you start with the starter pose, that starter file. Make sure you are in local. Local rotation, because that means that the bone will rotate relative to its axes, not the global axes, because what could sometimes happen if you switch to global and rotate the leg, the axis remains relative to the scene and not the individual bone. So to make posing easier, you want to be in local. So if you saw there, the widget switches its orientation to match the bone. And that's essentially all you're doing. So you're grabbing a single bone and rotating and changing their position. And because you've used the starter file, it's automatically inserting the data into the keyframe. And that is essentially how you create your pose. And that is what was done to create that. So of course, once we've got that and we've set the animation sequence up, we save this. Yes, we save this. We can export this. Now, if I remember correctly, we have to be in object mode. So switch from pose mode to object mode, make sure the skeleton is selected, and then export. FBX, selected object, geometry, disable, well, it'll automatically grey out that, so disable that. Armatures, add leaf bones, deselect. An animation, deselect NLA strips, and for start end keying. And we should be able to export that. Export. Oh, did we... no, we don't have to do anything for that. So, import. Load FBX. So now we want to pose which cone for oh no. There we go. If you don't when you're exporting poses, you might find that that happens. On import, we get a select skeleton root pop-up, and it'll sometimes not show anything there because, well, whatever reasons IMVU has for doing what it does. So to get round that, deselect the hide option, and it'll reveal some of the other objects that are actually in the scene but it thinks should be hidden. And you want the one from using exporting from Blender, you want the one with 86 bones. There are two, 88 and 86. One, I can't remember what the difference is, the additional 2 bones. Don't remember where they came from. 86, configure. No errors, import changes. And so it's got our pose, 19 frames. Make sure your apply scale is 0.01. Make sure rename room nodes is deselected, and import. Import changes, and then apply. So we now have to double check the furniture, which is that one. Switch back to actions. Now, how do we do this? I have to think. So we create a new action sequence. We want this to be stance.idle, and this is for the avatar. Infinite, repeat, and then down here we now should have our T-pose. Replace. Let's just quickly test this. So that's kind of fun. So that works. But what we now have to do, 0 for loops, and then we want a frame 1 and frame 60, I think it was. Dagnabbit. Was it 60 frames? How many frames did we do? Oh, 20. I was thinking of the animation for the cone itself, so 20. No, actually we don't want 20 because we want to exclude the reset, so it's 10 or 9. And there we have the pose, but we now have to just make a few adjustments to the position of the seat nodes to get that position right. But there we have. Let me just save that. And then I'll just, which is cone version 3. So what's happened there then is, because IMVU needs the pose needs to be reset so that IMVU understands that there's something going on with the file. So we've got a sequence that's actually 20 frames long, but the actual pose only occurs across 10 of them. So when we import the pose, once you've got everything set up to accommodate a pose, in the skeleton frame controls, what you then need to do is set the start frame and end frame so that they are within a valid range of the sequence. So we had frames 1 to frames 10 set. So any frame count from frame 1 up to frame 10 would produce a valid static pose. So you could probably do let's say 5 and 7, and you'd still get the same result. So we still get the same result. So once you've imported your pose, so long as the frame count within the skeletal controls fall within the active range that you want the pose, the active range within which the pose sits, you'll get your static pose. And that's it. So you create, we might fiddle with this a little bit, but so you create 2 action sequences in IMVU. One is for the cone, which is bobbing up and down, but obviously white screen, we can't see it, which is bobbing up and down. And then you create another action for the actual pose itself. And because both of them are set, or because we want both to activate as soon as the item loads or as soon as the avatar sits on the seat, you use stance.idle. There is a way to trigger furniture doing that, but I can't remember off the top of my head what it is. So I might have to do that for another occasion. But so now that we've got the pose in place, what we can do is look at the rough position. So she's sat more or less on the white stripe. So in Blender, that will mean so we want the node, we want the handle, we want the avatar, which we can use as a proxy, and we want to move the we want this to be in global. So she sat, so she needs to be moved backwards. By about that much, I'm guessing. So let's try that. Oh no, Twitch. I can see why you banned cones now. So get rid of that. Select the root node. Just save the file so we have a version. Save as. It's number 8. And export. FBX. Yeah, the word cones. Cone. I couldn't even use it in the title of this stream. Cone. No idea why, because traffic cones are a thing. So deselect, deselect, deselect. That's fine. Okay. So back into IMVU. So we saved this. So create another one. Yes, very, very naughty. So let's do all that again. Load. Which one are we doing? We want, well, either or. That's okay. So open that. Import 86 bones. This is the pose that we're importing first. That's okay. So 0.01. That's all right. Deselect that. Import. Okay. And then we have to import. Apply changes. Then we have to import the furniture. Which is cone 8. So ID is 0. 0.01, that's fine. Rename disabled. That's okay. So let's just set up an initial action for stance.idle avatar. Same ensemble, want this to infinitely loop. So we've got our T-pose, that's the avatar, loops. So let's just use 5 and 7 as we did before. And we want that to replace there we are, perfect. What a guess. So then what we want to do is stance.idle, and this is the furniture items animation. Room, play the same, infinite loop, control, and this was 60, so that's 1 to 60. Replace, apply changes, and although again it doesn't look like it because we're in a white room, we can mouse over the ground points to see that it's actually working. So perfect. So that is our witch's traffic cone. So let's save that. Save as. What is this version for? Version 4. Yeah, so that's it. That's our animated furniture item with a custom pose And it is animating because the ground is, it's just because, again, we're in a white room with no discernible fixed points of reference, that so we can't see what it's doing, because obviously the camera is following the avatar. So there's our witch's traffic cone. So, any questions?